Ever had a player who treats every tavern like a temple, every bottle like a holy relic, and every long rest like a chance to vibe with the universe? Yeah, that's when you know an avatar of a god of rock and roll just joined the campaign. Hello all you wonderfully funky world builders, Funky Monkey here, and welcome to today's tale of ecstasy, madness and divine liberation, where reality blurs, music rises and the gods start dancing barefoot in the ashes of order. This episode comes with a side of prophetic hangovers, cults that party way too hard, and the wine god who's equal parts therapist, trickster and existential crisis. So, grab your dice, pour yourself something fermented, embrace your campaign, because today we're talking about the only deity who can start a revolution and a conga line in the same evening. We are here because we love TTRPGs and stories in general. Be it Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Daggerheart or whatever chaos your bard's inspired performance just triggered. And if you're looking to add a god who dissolves borders, frees minds and occasionally sets the city on metaphorical fire, don't settle for a default boring wine spirit, pun intended. Because we don't want to settle, we once again turn to the ancient Greeks, the epic gossip enthusiasts. Those who are turning immortality into reality TV shows. So, in that spirit, on today's episode, the twice-born god of madness and miracle. Because if there's one thing this particular god teaches us, it's that sometimes the only way to find truth is to lose yourself first. Now, before he became the liberator of mortals, the terror of kings, and the original patron of good vibes gone bad, Dionysus was just a spark in Zeus's thigh and the prophecy waiting to burst. So, let's roll back the thunder, pour a fresh cup of ambrosia and meet Dionysus, the god who taught humanity how to drink, how to dream, and how to dance their way into divinity. In the wild festival that is Greek mythology, no god parties harder or weirder than Dionysus. He's a walking paradox, the god of wine and clarity, of liberation and madness, of joy that dances right up to horror's edge. Born twice, first from his mortal mother Semele and again from Zeus's own thigh, Dionysus roamed the ancient world, spreading wines, visions, and divine chaos. Though he showed up fashionably late to Olympus, he still demanded his seat at the table, and woe on anyone who told him no. His tale blends mystery cult, fertility rites, and hero's journey into one intoxicating mythic cocktail. From Homer to Apollodorus, and from the Bacchae to the Metamorphosis, the god of reverie crashes through myth and the world alike, offering world builders a divine study in duality, devotion, and beautiful, beautiful destruction. So let's talk about his origins. Because we are talking about Greek stories and myths, it all starts, as most Greek divine dramas do, with an affair and a very bad idea. Now I'm gonna give you a second to allow you to guess whose bad idea was that started all of this. And if you didn't answer Zeus, what's wrong with you? So, Semele, princess of Thebes, daughter of Cadmus, caught the wandering eye of Zeus, because of course she did. Hera, queen of heaven and patron saint of bad breakups, found out, because of course she did. And in a fit of cosmic jealousy, she whispered a deadly suggestion into Semele's ear. Ask Zeus to show you his true form. So Semele did. Zeus, bound by an oath, appeared in his full thunder-flashy glory, too divine for mortal eyes unfortunately. In an instant, Semele was burnt to ash. As the ancient Euripides puts it, she was struck by Zeus's thunder while in the pains of childbirth. But from the flames, Zeus snatched up the unborn child and stitched him into his own thigh, turning his body into something of a divine womb. Months later, the god emerged, horn-crowned and wreathed in lightning. Dionysus, the bull-horned god, had arrived. Of course, this is the Greeks we are talking about, so of course there are multiple myths regarding Dionysus's origin. So if you thought one miraculous birth was enough for Dionysus, think again. Like a true god of chaos, he's got multiple origin stories depending on who's telling them and how much wine they've had. For example, the Homeric hymn says that he was born in secret on Mount Nysa, hidden from Hera's wrath and honored ever after alongside his mother Semele. Other traditions expand the tale. In one more common story, Hermes saves the unborn child. Zeus hides him in his thigh, and after birth, Hermes spirits the baby away, disguised as a girl, to Ino and Athamas, adoptive parents. When Hera discovers the ruse, she drives both of his parents, Ino and Athamas, mad, and Ino leaps into the sea with the child. Zeus then transforms Dionysus into a small goat to hide him until the Nysiades, ivy-crowned nymphs living on Mount Nysa, raise him among the vines. In the Orphic tradition, he appears as Dionysus Zagreus, son of Persephone, the queen of the underworld. In this darker myth, the child is torn apart by the Titans and reborn from his divine remains, a story more mystery cult gospel than tavern tale, yet vital to later Dionysian rites. Elsewhere, historian Diodorus Siculus speaks of two Dionysoi, or two Dionysies, if that's a word. The elder, the Indian Dionysus of Eastern fertility cults, and the younger Theban revel bringer Dionysus. These aren't contradictions, they're proof of Dionysus's mythic fluidity. Wherever wine flows and ecstasy follows, local gods melted into his legend. Whatever the version, the theme holds. Dionysus is twice born, first from mortal flame and then the second time from divine flesh. His epithet, Demetor, means of two mothers, and it marks him as a being between worlds. Mortal and divine, sane and wild, civilized and feral. From birth, he's not just Zeus's son, he's the crack in reality where divinity and humanity blur. Because if Dionysus teaches world builders anything, it's this. Divinity is a remix, not a rulebook. Let's turn our attention to his youth and the discovery of the vine. Raised in secret among mountain nymphs on Mount Nysa, Dionysus grew as the wild heart of nature. Apollodorus says that he discovered the vine and the sacred art of winemaking, humanity's gift and Hera's new headache. In her fury, she struck him with madness, driving him to wander through Egypt and Syria until the greater mother Rhea, or Cybele or Cybele depending on the pronunciation, found and purified Dionysus, teaching her ecstatic rites. From then on, Dionysus became the wandering god, roaming Lydia, Phrygia, Persia and Bactria, bringing strange Eastern rites and divine madness wherever he went. His Thiassos, or his followers, were satyrs, nymphs, Sileni and the frenzied Menaids, women who gave themselves over to the cult of Dionysus. They were everywhere they went, followed with drums, ivy-crowned thirsoi and wild dances. In the epic work The Bacchae, Rhea invents the drum and cymbal, the pulse of his cult and the echo of his power. Dionysus gave mortals more than wine. He offered ecstasy, frenzy, and the sacred chaos of losing oneself to something divine. Now, because he was the god of wine and he had a very wild nature inspired streak, you might imagine that Dionysus had some anger issues. But you would be wrong. There were very few things that actually angered Dionysus. And among the very few things, the only thing that really pushed his buttons was denial. King Lycurgus of Thrace learned that the hard way. When the young god led his followers across Thrace, bringing vines, teaching people how to make wine, and initiated them in the new rites, Lycurgus drove them out with threats and steel. Dionysus actually fled into the sea where Thetis hid him, but Hera, although didn't really like Dionysus at all, really didn't like when mortals threatened gods, even those she didn't like. And she found another excuse to punish mortals. And so she struck Lycurgus with madness. In his frenzy, he started hacking down his own vineyards, mistaking them somehow for Menades, the frenzied, wild-looking women that accompanied Dionysus. And by mistake, he struck down his own son, Dryas. As a result, the land withered, and because the Thracians were distraught and desperate for redemption, they sought out oracles. And by oracles' decree, the Thracians bound their king and fed him to horses. Moral of the story: reject the wine and even the earth goes thirsty. There's also another moral to the story: don't fuck around with gods because Hera will definitely strike you down. This unfortunate pattern repeats in Thebes. Here, King Pentheus mocked the newly brought rites, denied the young god, and ordered that the cult's leader be arrested, unaware that his prisoner was actually Dionysus himself, who came back to Thebes to redeem his own name and that of his mother. Calmly, the god warned, I quote, "You do not recognize me, nor your own misfortune." End quote. Then he convinced Pentheus to spy on the Menades, to see how things are actually taking place in the rites. But to do so, he convinced the king to disguise himself in women's robes and then spy on the Menades. So the king did so and watched the Menades until frenzy actually took them over. Mistaking him for a beast, they tore him apart limb from limb. His mother, Agave, who was one of the Menades, led the slaughter, carrying his head home in triumph before the frenzy and the ecstasy wearing off and horror dawning. Euripides' Bacche turned it into a warning. Dionysus is gentle to believers, but merciless to doubters. He offers ecstasy or annihilation. Refuse the dance, and you're dancing anyway. But no other tale shows Dionysus' power better than that of the Tyrrhenian pirates, sailors foolish enough to kidnap the king of joy and wine itself. In the Homeric hymn, he appears as a radiant youth on the shore, dancing the day away. The pirates seized him, but their ropes fell loose, and only the helmsman felt dread, saying to his companions, "This one is no mere mortal." But they did not listen, and then, as they set sail, the sea itself began to sing. Ivy and grapevines burst from the mast, wine flowed across the deck, and wild beasts, panthers, lions, and even bears appeared from thin air. Terrified, the crew leapt into the sea, where the god decided to punish them, turning them into dolphins, sparing only the helmsman who had shown reverence. Ovid tells the same miracle through the fisherman Acoetes. The crew mocked the boy, bound him, and set sail, until vines seized the oars and Dionysus became a lion. Once again, the sailors dove into the waves and became dolphins. Ancient storytellers say that that's why dolphins are clever and kind. They remember the teaching of the god who changed them as punishment. That's why they became very clever and very kind. The tale is both miracle and warning. Dionysus forgives the wise, but for those who cage joy and merriment for profit, for ransom, well, the sea is waiting. Another facet of Dionysus is, of course, his love life, because he's a Greek god. Now, every revel needs a love story, and Dionysus found his in the most human of places: heartbreak. When the hero Theseus, by the way, I have a video on Theseus if you're curious. So, when the hero Theseus abandoned Ariadne, daughter of King Minos on the island of Naxos, it wasn't the end for her story, although she was heartbroken. It was, on the other hand, the beginning of his love story. Apollodorus tells us that Dionysus fell in love with Ariadne and carried her off to Lemnos, where she bore him sons, Thoas, Staphylos, Oenopion, and Peparethus. Their names echo through the islands of the Aegean, each tied to the vine and the cup. For example, Staphylos means grape cluster, and each son later became the founder of a wine-rich land. Other tellings keep the romance on Naxos itself. Sometimes Dionysus appears in person, other times as a divine voice in Theseus' dream, ordering him to sail away and leave the woman to her destiny. In gratitude and love, the god later cast Ariadne's jeweled crown into the heavens, where it still shines as the constellation Corona Borealis, the crown of the north. Through Ariadne, Dionysus isn't just the god of intoxication. He becomes the god of union, rebirth, and the sweet aftertaste of redemption. Even in his wildest myths, he never forgets, and he always tells us that joy and sorrow share the same cup. Even gods of ecstasy remember their mothers. After triumphing over kings and pirates alike, Dionysus turned his gaze downwards into the shadowed realm of the dead. According to Apollodorus, he descends into Hades himself to retrieve Semele, his mother, the mortal who bore him and burned for it. There he faced Persephone, queen of the underworld, and persuaded her to release Semele's spirit. He brought her back to the living world, renaming her Thyone, meaning the raging one. Together they ascended to Olympus, where mother and son took their place among the gods. I'm sure Hera was not very pleased. This act reveals the full scope of Dionysus' power. He's not only the god of wine and revel, he is chthonic, bridging life and death, madness and mercy, underworld and heaven. Only a true son of Zeus could demand such a gift from Hades, and he actually obliged. In art and poetry, Dionysus often raises besides Thyone, crowned with ivy, radiant with triumph. Later poets, Ovid among them, says he set her among the stars, her constellation shining as proof that even in divine chaos, love endures beyond death. Now, even Olympus couldn't contain Dionysus for long. His revels spilled beyond Greece, echoing across the Hellenistic world. Historians like Diodorus Siculus tells of a god who didn't just pour wine, he poured civilization. Dionysus led an expedition eastward, marching through Thrace, Phrygia, and India, conquering lands not with sword but with vines. Wherever he went, he taught mortals the art of civilization and the rapture of ritual. These tales, although embroidered by Alexander the Great's later claim that he was Dionysus reborn, reveal something deeper. The god as both civilizer and colonizer, a divine ambassador of transformation. Apollodorus notes that after Rhea's purification, Dionysus marched through Thrace and India, spreading his mysteries across the known world. As his worship expanded, so did his identity. In Phrygia, he blended with Sabazios, in Lydia with Bacchus, each local god absorbed into the rhythm of his myth. By the time the Romans met him, he had become Liber or Bacchus, the wild heart of the Mediterranean. a god whose wine could both free and consume. Every vine that curled around a column, every drumbeat that echoed through a hillside, these were Dionysus's footprints. He didn't just conquer the world, he taught it how to dance. Of course, because we are talking about Greek mythology, there are also lesser known myths and motifs. The mythology of Dionysus is a bottomless amphora. Swirl it once and you'll find 100 new flavors. Beyond the famous feasts and tragedies lie smaller, stranger tales that sparkle with storytelling potential. Let's take for example the hanging in Tyre. In Lost Fragments, Dionysus is captured by Tyrrhenians and hung from a tree before his miraculous rescue. Scholars see echoes of his role as a tree god or a nature god, life rooted in death, and even early hints of a crucifixion motif that we all learn later from Christianity. But it started around this time, around the birth of Dionysus's myth. We also have another story, the Menidius' madness. In Orchomenus, 3 sisters refused to join the Bacchic rites. Dionysus, disguised as a maiden, lured them into frenzy. They tore apart one of their children before being transformed into bats or owls, forever creatures of the night. Like Pentheus, they learned that denying the god leads not to safety, but self-destruction. Another story connects Dionysus to Attis, and in this case, both are bound by cycles of death and rebirth. By the way, Attis is a Phrygian god. But while Attis is mutilated, Dionysus remains androgynous, not broken. His long hair and flowing robes blending masculine power and feminine grace into one divine identity. Another story comes to us in the form of the story of King Midas. I'm sure you heard this one. One night, the old satyr Silenius stumbled into Phrygia, drunk and singing. King Midas captured him, but when Dionysus came to reclaim his friend, he offered the king a wish. Midas chose gold, then watched his food, his drink, and even his daughter turn to metal after being touched by him. A quick bath in the Pactolus river cured him, but the myth endured as a golden warning. Not all gifts are blessings. Oh, and there's another one, a good one actually. The Tale of Two Vineyards. This is a folk story that tells of 2 men visited by a stranger at night. The kind host received a vine that bore wine forever, while the greedy, stingy one received a vine whose grapes turned to water. Moral of the myth: hospitality is holy, especially when the guest might be a god. Each of these smaller tales show Dionysus among mortals, testing, rewarding, or destroying them according to their faith and generosity. They're perfect seeds for storytelling or TTRPG design. A village that rejects a wandering stranger, a cursed vineyard, a mad family line touched by divine frenzy, or a god disguised as a traveler whose blessing depends on kindness. In every version, the lesson is the same: honor the divine spark in the wild and the stranger, or risk being consumed by it. Now, because Dionysus is a Greek god, there are many symbols and ways of worshipping him. Every symbol of Dionysus tells a story. The thyrsus, the vine, the ivy, the leopard, the goat, and the bull horns all point to his rule over nature, fertile, untamed, and forever growing. He's called Dendrites, one of the trees, Bromius, the roarer, and Athios, the flowery. In the Bacchae, the chorus hails him as Bromius, child of a god, a name that echoes both thunder and the ecstatic cry of worshippers lost in divine madness. His festivals were as transformative as the god himself. The Dionysia, held in his honor, birthed Greek theater, the sacred stage where mortals reenacted divine emotions through tragedy and comedy. The Anthesteria celebrated the new wine and the thin veil between life and death. Jars were opened, songs were sung, and the spirit of the dead were invited to drink among the living. In Orphic rites, initiates sought to transcend their titanic nature by identifying with Dionysus Agreus, dying symbolically and being reborn through him, purified, echoes that reverberate in Christianity. But Dionysus didn't just break boundaries, he erased them entirely. In the Bacchae, he appears as an androgynous youth robed in softness, urging even King Pentheus to cross-dress and see the world through different eyes. His worship blurred the lines of gender and class. Men wore women's garbs, women took up the thyrsus, and all were united in sacred frenzy. His very titles, Lysios the Releaser and Eleutherios the Liberator, speak to his essence. Dionysus frees mortals from their masks, dissolves their fears, and reminds them that ecstasy and empathy are two faces of the same divine truth. He's not only the god of wine, he's the god of being unbound. Now, dear world builders, if you want to bring a little divine chaos to your campaign, Dionysus is your guy. His myths overflow with world building potential, each one a seed for stories that blur the line between mortal and divine, order and ecstasy. Imagine a child of prophecy hidden from a jealous goddess, a classic setup for a main character with divine bloodlines or mysterious destinies. Imagine an adventurer who suddenly manifests powers and then a cult hails them as the reincarnation of a forgotten god. And with that, our journey through vine and vision, madness and miracles comes to a close. If this dive into divine chaos and vintage storytelling sparked an idea or just made you side-eye that bottle on your shelf a little differently, hit that subscribe button and join this growing funky community. Drop a like and show me you found some inspiration, and ring that bell like a marinade with rhythm. Just maybe don't start a frenzy in the comments. Now, got a favorite myth, a trickster, or a beautifully unhinged god you love me to cover next? Drop it in the comments below. I adore hearing how you funky world builders twist old myths into new adventures. Thank you truly for sharing your time with me, for your imagination, and for your wonderfully wild creativity. Until next time, stay curious, stay funky, and never stop world building. Your mind and imagination are awesome, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Trust your own awesomeness. And remember, every feast has its hangover, every revelation its risk, and somewhere out there, under a silver moon and the sky full of stars, Dionysus is still dancing. Have yourselves a wild, wonder-filled, funky day. Cheers.